Look closely at this blinking screen. My tactical GPS shows that today is March 15th. The year is 2046. But the mechanical watch on my wrist, which I wound right before stepping out of my base camp, has counted exactly 1 hour and 14 minutes since I started the final descent. I'm not crazy, and my tracker isn't broken. I have calibrated it 3 times using military-grade satellite pings. I just found Station Vostok-13, and I made the most terrifying mistake of my life. I went inside. Vostok-13 never existed on official maps. According to my decrypted data logs, it was a classified project designed to study deep magnetic anomalies beneath the glacier, far below the permafrost line. They stopped communicating in the winter of 1989. No distress signal, no evacuation logs. Just dead silence. I fought my way to these coordinates through a blind Arctic storm for 3 agonizing weeks. The wind was howling at 80 miles per hour, tearing at my gear, burying my tent every single night. The cold was so absolute it cracked the rubber on my boots. But when I finally approached the outer perimeter of the main airlock, the storm didn't just die down. It completely stopped. It didn't fade away like a normal weather system. The snowflakes actually hung in the air. Thousands of them, suspended in the dark sky, illuminated by the beam of my flashlight. I stood there, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what I was looking at. I reached out a heavy tactical glove and touched one of them. It didn't melt. It didn't blow away. It hung in the void, completely motionless, as if nailed to invisible glass. I could push it with my finger and it would slowly glide through the air and stop again. The silence outside that door was absolute. Not the silence of a calm night, but the silence of a vacuum. The massive steel blast door was covered in decades of rust, but when I pulled the heavy lever, it gave way surprisingly easily. The gears groaned, a sound that stretched out far longer than it should have. There was no ice inside the airlock. No frost covering the walls. There was only stale, heavy air smelling of ozone, burnt copper, and old machine oil. I turned on my chest rig flashlight, the beam cutting through the floating dust particles. Even the dust was moving wrong. It was drifting with agonizing slowness. I stepped over the massive steel threshold and into the darkness of the long concrete corridor. With every step I took, the air grew thicker. I could physically feel it pushing against my lungs. It was as if I was walking not through a gaseous atmosphere, but through clear, dense oil. The resistance was uniform, pressing against my arms, my chest, my legs. My movements slowed down involuntarily. I tried to turn my head quickly, but my neck muscles strained against the invisible pressure. My own pulse began to pound in my ears with an unnatural, terrifying delay. One heavy, echoing beat, then a long, agonizing pause of absolute silence, and then another beat. It felt like minutes passed between each breath. I looked up at an industrial ventilation fan mounted near the ceiling. Its heavy metal blades were spinning, but they were making exactly 1 revolution per minute. I could see the individual scratches on the gray paint of the blades. I could see a speck of grease slowly flying off the edge, suspended in midair, inching toward the wall. What should have been roaring at thousands of RPMs, circulating air through the underground complex, was crawling at the speed of a dying snail. The low hum of the motor was stretched into a deep, guttural vibration that shook the fillings in my teeth. That was when the horrifying realization finally hit me. Vostok-13 wasn't abandoned. It wasn't frozen. It was stuck. The very fabric of time had thickened, trapping everything inside this concrete tomb. I forced myself to keep moving, descending the concrete stairwell to the 2nd level, down into the residential sector. Just walking down 1 flight of stairs took an eternity. Gravity itself felt sluggish, pulling me down with a gentle, terrifying reluctance. When my boot hit the metal grating, the clang echoed endlessly, a continuous, droning metallic note that refused to die out. I pushed open the double doors leading to the main recreation room. The beam of my flashlight swept across old Soviet posters on the walls, analog machinery, and finally stopped on a table in the center of the room. And what I saw there made me stop breathing completely. A heavy glass mug was falling off the edge of the metal table, but it hadn't shattered. It hung exactly 4 inches above the cracked concrete floor. Hot black coffee was spilling out of it in a perfect, glossy, unbroken arc. Every single drop, every splash, was locked in 3-dimensional space. I walked completely around it, my boots crunching slowly against the floor. I leaned in and examined the perfect physics of the dark liquid, frozen a fraction of a microsecond before impact. I could see the tiny bubbles trapped within the flying droplets. It wasn't a photograph. The liquid was moving, but at a speed so microscopic that my brain could barely process it. Then I looked up at the table. There were people sitting there. 4 scientists dressed in heavy vintage polar exploration jackets with faded patches. At first, my mind tried to rationalize it. I thought they were highly detailed mannequins left behind as some sick joke. Or maybe they had been perfectly flash frozen by a sudden chemical leak. But there wasn't a single ounce of ice or frost on their clothing or their skin. Their complexions were a natural, healthy color. Sweat was visible on their foreheads. I stepped right up to one of them. A man with a thick gray beard and wire-rimmed glasses. He was staring down at the falling mug. His mouth was slightly open, his facial muscles contorted in a sudden expression of shock and a beginning scream. I leaned in so close I could see the individual pores on his nose. I raised my heavy flashlight and shined the concentrated LED beam directly into his left pupil. I waited. I stood there in the thick, oppressive air, holding my breath, counting the seconds in my head. 1 minute, 2 minutes, and then I saw it. The pupil constricted. Very, very slowly, the black circle shrank, reacting to the intense light. A tiny bead of sweat on his temple rolled down perhaps a millimeter. They were alive. All 4 of them were perfectly, completely alive. They had just been living this exact, singular second of their lives for almost 40 years. Their hearts beat maybe once a month. Their lungs took a desperate breath of air once a year. The electrical signals in their brains were firing at a glacial pace. To them, the mug was still falling to the floor. To them, the disaster that engulfed the station had just begun. If I touched him, if I tried to drag him out, the sudden change in temporal pressure would probably tear his cellular structure apart. I backed away from the table, my stomach turning, and moved further down the main arterial corridor toward the reactor zone. The pressure of space became almost unbearable. I had to exert superhuman, exhausting effort just to lift my heavy tactical boot off the floor and push it forward. The air resisted me like a solid wall of setting concrete. I pushed through the final heavy blast doors, entering the cavernous main hall. Right in the center, suspended above the torn and melted deep drilling equipment, was the thing they had dug up from beneath the Earth's crust. It wasn't a generator. It wasn't a machine. It was an absolutely pitch-black, geometrically perfect sphere, hovering silently in the air. It absorbed all light from my flashlight, reflecting nothing back. Massive waves of distortion were radiating from its surface, rippling outward like hot air over scorching summer asphalt, except these waves weren't bending light. They were bending time itself. I could see the concrete pillars around it warping and twisting in the temporal field. I realized that if I took even one more step closer to that sphere, the gravity of its anomaly would pull me in completely. I would stay here forever. I would become one of those living statues in the break room. My mind would continue to work at normal speed, fully aware, but my body would be trapped in a single, agonizing second for millennia. I would be screaming inside my own head for eternity, unable to even close my eyes. I turned around and ran. Or at least I tried to run. My muscles burned with a violent, searing pain. Every movement felt as though I was swimming upstream under a massive, crushing volume of deep ocean water. Something invisible and immensely powerful was pulling me back. The sphere seemed to sense my presence, acting like a temporal magnet, trying to synchronize my heartbeat with its own dead, endless rhythm. I pushed through the thick, jelly-like air of the corridor, my boots scraping agonizingly slowly across the floor. I forced my way past the break room, past the frozen scientists who were still locked in their silent scream, past the dark drops of coffee still suspended in midair. I reached the main airlock, my vision blurring from the exertion. I threw my entire body weight against the heavy steel blast door. It groaned, resisting me, but I pushed with everything I had left. I tumbled outside, collapsing into the freezing Arctic snow. The heavy door slammed shut behind me with a deafening, final crash, sealing the anomaly away. I fell to my hands and knees, greedily gasping the freezing, fast, beautifully normal air. The wind howled around me in real time. But when I finally caught my breath and looked up at the clear night sky, my blood ran cold. I didn't recognize the constellations. The stars were not in their correct orbital positions. The North Star had shifted dramatically across the horizon. With violently trembling hands, I pulled out my tactical tracker and wiped the snow from the screen. I had been inside the station for exactly 60 minutes. But outside that steel door for the rest of the world, 21 years had passed. Do not look for Vostok-13. Time doesn't heal there. Time stops there.